And with that, I think we've covered a lot about the policy, the renewable energy. And next up, we were going to have an expert from IRENA, International Renewable Energy Agency, Diana. And Diana has around 10 years of experience within IRENA, and she knows all the frontiers about the renewable energy policy. And next up, we are going to hear a speech from her. Now, the stage is yours, Diana.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here with you, with the young leaders of energy and sustainability. And it's very nice to see so many people here and to see your hearts in the right place. So the future depends on you, so and me a bit, because I'm also still young. So today I will be talking about the International Renewable Energy Agency, which is IRENA's outlook towards the future. So we have a scenario, the 1.5 degree scenario that we will be talking about. We will be also presenting its investment needs and its policy needs and what kind of socioeconomic impacts we will see. So as we can see in this graph, for the past 7 years, more renewable capacity has been added to the grid annually than fossil fuels and nuclear combined. So fossil fuels and nuclear, as you see them in gray, and the blue is renewable. And you see that for the past 7 years, we have had more renewable added than the other sources combined. In 2020, a record level of 260 gigawatt capacity was added globally, more than 4 times the capacity added from other sources. Renewable power technologies are now dominating as they have become the cheapest source of electricity in many markets. So these are the costs of renewable energy technologies, the different technologies. And as you can see here, solar PV has had the highest drop in global weighted average LCOE, so levelized cost of electricity. So this here is for utility scale solar PV, the one you see in the middle with a large drop. So you see that solar PV has dropped by 85% between 2010 and 2020. At one point in time, solar PV was more than double the cost of the most expensive fossil fuel option for power generation. So the most expensive one, double it. At some point, PV was even more expensive, but that was in the past. Today, now, utility scale PV, solar PV, can compete with the cheapest fossil fuel source. So this shows you how cost competitive utility scale solar PV has become. But this is not only for solar PV. As you can see, onshore and offshore wind have decreased by around 56% and 42% respectively. And CSP also had a very large drop by 68%, all in the same period. So this drop in costs of technology has led a lot of countries to adopt renewables. So as you can see in this graph, we see the investments, but here it's not only in renewable energy. These are trends in investments in what we call energy transition related solutions. So those are solutions that are going to be adopted for the energy transition that are broader than just renewable energy. And here we see hydrogen, we see energy storage, we see electrical vehicles, electrified heat, like heat pumps, and carbon capture and storage, and renewables. So as you can see here, in 2020, investments in global energy transition related solutions hit a record high of $524 billion US. And they have grown steadily over the past 15 years. You see that renewable energy investments are the majority. They dominate these investment flows, though their share, if you see that their share has decreased between 2005 and today. So between 2005 to 2009, renewables were almost, as you can see, on average, 90% of the total investments in the energy transition. But then between 2016 and 2020, on average, they comprise around 70% of the total energy transition. One of the reasons is, as we saw, the cost of technology fell. So naturally, the share in total investments also falls. But also another reason for that is the adoption of other solutions started increasing and started maturing as other technologies started to mature and as countries started to adopt policies to support these technologies. So for example, if you look at electrified transport or EVs, you see that in 2017, there was a big spike. So in 2017, what happened? At least 60 countries and 40 jurisdictions at the subnational level, like for example, a city or a municipality, had set objectives for the deployment of electric vehicles. So by setting objectives, you see they've attracted a lot of investments. And by the end of 2019, at least 13 jurisdictions had introduced financial incentives to support their deployment. So now in at least 13 jurisdictions, you get tax breaks or you get support to buy an electric vehicle. So EVs, investments in EVs also, investments in electric heat also increased over the past couple of years as more countries adopt financial incentives for the installation of heat pumps, such as grants, rebates, tax incentives, and the other loan programs. So we see there's a lot of progress, as we saw there, but as you can see in this graph, all this progress made up to date is by far not enough. Despite the clear evidence of human-caused climate change, widespread support from the Paris Agreement, increased commitments, and also the general prevailing knowledge that renewables are now, or the energy transition related solutions are now economically feasible and they are sustainable energy options, energy related CO2 emissions increased by 1.3 annually on average between 2014 and 2019. So despite everything that we've seen in terms of commitments, in terms of advancements in these technologies, our carbon for our energy-related CO2 emissions is still increasing. And I think that this year it would have also increased more. And also progress has been uneven between regions and countries. So for example, we see that so many countries and so many regions are very advanced, but in other countries, we don't see this advancement. So let's say as an example, in 2020, Europe, the US, and China accounted for the largest share of new renewable capacity, the one we saw on the first graph. So we saw that we had a very high increase in 2020, but now we see that it was mostly focused in Europe, US, and China. Africa, for example, accounted for only 1% of the global total renewable capacity, although we all know that in Africa, there's a large need for electricity. There's a large population unelectrified. There's a very large potential for renewables. There's sun, there's wind, everything, all the conditions are there. And so all the need is there, the conditions are there, but we see that investments are not flowing there and nothing is happening. But even with that, we see that the current plans, so what you see here in this graph, on the top, you see the baseline scenario, which is the continuation as business as usual. The yellow line that you see here is what we call in IRENA the planned energy scenario. Planned energy scenario means if we account for all those plans in place, the current NDCs, so if all of those are achieved, we see that we barely reach a stabilization in CO2 emissions, nowhere where we need to be by 2050. So if we look at the blue line, this is where we see that this is aligned with IRENA's 1.5 degree scenario. So this is in alignment with the IPCC report on limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees by 2050. So this is IRENA's 1.5 degree pathway that shows the way to a steep and continuous downward trajectory trend for CO2 emissions that shows a 45% decline between 2010 to 2030 and net zero by 2050. So what does this scenario represent? So on the left side, you see our total final energy consumption in 2018 and what it was made of. And on the right side, you see where we should be in 2050. So among the main points are electricity in 2050 will provide more than half of total energy use. So heating and cooling and transport will be electrified. And 90% of this electricity is going to come from renewables. So why is that? Because electricity is already, we've already found many ways to decarbonize electricity in very cost competitive ways. The technology is there to electrify, like EVs, like heat pumps, efficient electrification. So 50%, more than 50% of the energy will come from electricity. Other sources of energy, we just saw a presentation on hydrogen, 12%. 66% is green hydrogen, so electrolysis and whatnot. 18% comes from modern biomass. We call it modern biomass, but I like to focus and to stress on the word sustainable biomass. Sustainable biomass, what it is, it's a very large definition, but in general, it is about trying to make sure that the biomass that we use is used in a sustainable way, that we are not causing deforestation and competing with food and consuming a lot of land and water. And we see that the other 9% comes from other renewables, 5 of which is for heating and cooling that goes into district heating and cooling systems. What kind of investments will this scenario require? So we see that achieving this transition will require a total investment of $131 trillion, which is 33 trillion more than what plans are already there in place. So the PES, what we call in IRENA, the planned energy scenario, the PES. So all the plans that are globally in place now, they would require $98 trillion. The 1.5 degree scenario would require 131. So this is an additional $33 trillion. On annual terms, it's $4.4 trillion. It seems like a lot. But when we look at 2019, so this is the level of funding, although it seems like it's large, it still represents only about 5% of the global GDP of 2019. And it's also within the capacity of global financial markets. So 4.4 trillion, like this, it seems a lot, but it is only 5% of GDP of 2019. And it is also within the reach of everyone who's going to space every day now. So this is achievable. But then the structure, where this money comes from, it will vary between what we have doing so far, what we will do in the planned energy scenario, and what we will do in the 1.5 scenario. So this will require not only a higher volume of financing, but a change in the structure of the financing. The private sector's share of financing would grow dramatically under the 1.5 degree scenario compared to the 2019 that you see on the left side and the PES, which you see in the middle. The share of debt capital has to increase from 44% to 57%. And energy transition technologies should find it increasingly easy to obtain affordable long-term debt financing, while brown assets, so all the other fossil fuel assets, will progressively be avoided by private financiers and therefore forced to rely on equity financing from retained earnings and new equity issues. This is not what we are seeing yet today, but hopefully with the increased commitments in COP and with the increased restrictions from governments, we will start seeing that the private sector will start moving faster into energy transition related solutions and away from oil and gas investments. It is important to mention that those numbers that you see here, including the one we saw before, so these numbers, the 1.1 trillion and which is the same as this, these are only going into the energy transition related technologies. So those are going only in the technologies. But what we know is that we need to create enabling environment for these technologies. So which means that, in fact, the energy transition is going to cost much more than this. And the public sector, so we saw here in this slide, we see that the public sector investments in renewables and other energy transition related technologies will go down, but it doesn't mean that they will invest less. It will mean that the money that they give will be more, but it has to go into the policies, into the creation of enabling environments, and we will see all those policies now. So the first type of policies is the deployment policies. So those are the policies that are there to directly support the deployment of technologies. So we saw that, for example, in our 1.5-degree scenario, we see that we will need renewables. So renewables will be responsible for 25% of the reduction in CO2. And for renewables, we need regulatory measures that create a market for the solutions, fiscal and financial incentives that make them more affordable. And now we will get into one of those instruments, the auction, but just in a bit. We will see that energy conservation and efficiency will also be responsible for 25% of the reduction, and we need policies to support energy efficiency, like strict building codes and efficient appliances. Electrification of end uses, as we saw, will be responsible for a 20% drop as well. And for that, we need to make sure that our targets in the power sector and our policies in the power sector will also account for electrifying other end uses. So we're not only designing a power system that is made only for our current power consumption. We have to look forward to an increased power consumption and a power system that can take it and can support renewables. So we need a whole power structure or power market redesign. Hydrogen and carbon capture will also need their own policies. So as we said, today we are focusing our deployment policy on renewable energy auctions. Why renewable energy auctions? Because they are currently the most popular policy instrument by countries, developed and developing countries alike, because of the strengths of auctions. So you see here in 2010, we barely had 20 countries with auctions. In 2020, we have more than 100. So the strengths of auctions, first of all, so an auction, let's define what an auction is. An auction is the competitive procurement of renewable electricity by an off-taker. The off-taker is the entity responsible for buying the electricity from the generator and then passing it over to the distributor. So currently we saw, or before in the early 2000s and in 2010, we used to have the feed-in tariff that was a fixed tariff fixed by the government to buy electricity from generators. It was administratively set, and there were many ways of finding what an adequate tariff in a country is. But then we started realizing that with the falling cost of technology, we need to continuously update this tariff. It's very difficult to set a tariff administratively. So we decided that an auction or the competitive procurement of electricity is a good way to let the market let us know what is a good tariff to pay. So it reduces windfall profits. Windfall profits are when the developers make a lot of money because the tariff that was set is too high and the cost of technology is falling and it does not capture it. So the main strength of auctions is that the competition, when there is competition in the market, it is able to capture the falling cost of technology, and we are able to keep tracking what is the real price of electricity in a specific context and of a specific technology, of course. Auctions are flexible in their design, so we can also design them in a way to achieve objectives beyond the price. So lowest price is one objective, but we can also design auctions in ways like an optimization exercise to have objectives beyond price. And one of those objectives that is increasingly important, the more we add renewable or valuable renewable energy to the mix, the more important that objective is, which is system integration. Another objective is also as important, if not more, the socioeconomic benefits that the project will create to the community where the project is built and also to the country in general. Auctions also provide greater certainty in terms of quantities. So unlike a feed-in tariff that doesn't have, if it doesn't have a cap, with an auction, we know that this is exactly the volume that is coming online, and it lets us control better the quantity that's being injected into the grid and also the budget that will be required. Auctions end up in solid contracts that are very well designed between the auctioneer and the developer. So the responsibilities are clearly defined, and the penalties if somebody does not abide by the responsibilities or deliver them are also clearly defined. However, auctions, like any other policy instrument, are associated with some weaknesses. First of all, one of the things that we look forward to in an auction, which is the competition to reduce the prices, might be an excessive competition. So if we have excessive competition and all the bidders start bidding aggressively, then we might have a risk of underbidding. Underbidding is when bidders bid very low to win the project and they cannot deliver their projects, which results or may result in underbuilding. Underbuilding is when we do not deliver all the projects that are needed because the developer bid too low, they are bankrupt, they don't build their project, or there's delays. Another weakness of auctions is that in order to prepare the bids and in order to prepare an aggressive bids, but to get all the documentation that is necessary to bid according, and this is defined in the design of the auction, it means that we favor the large companies that can afford this. And the large companies are usually more competitive, and international companies are more competitive than local companies when an auction is open to foreign competition. So those are weaknesses because we want to make sure that when we start a renewable energy sector in a country, to reap as much benefits as we want from it. And this means encouraging small developers, new developers to enter, which sometimes cannot compete with large or international players. So this here is a graph that shows you the drop in the price resulting from auctions between 2010 and 2018. We have not updated our graphs since 2018, but this shows you what it is that I wanted to show, that as the cost of technologies, as we saw in the second slide, dropped, the price resulting from an auction was able to capture that falling cost of technology. If you are wondering what is the difference between a levelized cost of electricity and the price resulting from auction, the levelized cost of electricity is what is going to cost the developer to produce a kilowatt hour of electricity. The price he bids for or he offers is what he is willing to get from it. So naturally, the price he bids needs to be higher than the levelized cost, and the rest is his profit. The danger is when the developer bid lower than their costs just to win the project and they cannot deliver the project. What we see here is a big decrease. Obviously, the solar decreases faster than wind. And as we saw on the previous slide, it's because solar started at a higher technology cost and because it was less mature than wind. Wind was more mature. And so you see that they both declined at wind at a slower rate. What's also very interesting to see in this graph is that at the end, when you see right before 2018, you start seeing the prices going up a bit. So although the cost of technology is still dropping, we see prices from auctions starting to go up. And it can be for many, many reasons. One of the reasons can be that this is a global weighted average price. So in some countries, when we do an auction, if we're still new to auctions or we're still new to renewables, obviously we're going to get prices that are much higher than in other countries. So if the majority of auctions taking place in 2017 were in developed markets with low prices, and we had more countries with less developed markets happening in 2018, of course, it's going to skew the average a bit higher. Another reason is that, as we mentioned before, auctions can be designed in a way to support objectives beyond the price, like system integration. So as the share of renewables increases in the mix, we need to support system integration. So we are no longer going for an auction that supports lowest price. We are now going for one that supports system integration. So for example, a project can be placed in an area that has less solar resources, for example, but is closer to the grid. So this is a compromise we make between price and another objective. And a third reason that is a bit more obvious than the second is that in some countries that have high levels of renewable energy deployment, in some areas, maybe the resources or the sites with the best resources have already been consumed, and now we are going to lower performing sites. Or we are in markets with higher risk of being curtailed if there's no design of policies that ensures non-curtailment. So many factors vary into the price of an auction, and here they are. We classify them into 4 categories. The country-specific conditions, like the cost of technology, labor, and land, how confident the investor is in the sector, the other policies supporting renewables, and the auction design, the design of the auction itself. So other policies supporting renewables relate to whether there is a very good target that gives us confidence, or whether there's a tax break that reduces the cost. The auction design is the design of the auction itself, whether it is meant for lower prices or objectives. And here we see that those are the other objectives. We talked about system integration. We talked about the socioeconomic benefits. Another objective is ensuring that that the projects are delivered on time and that they achieve all what was promised in the bid, including the socioeconomic benefits. So, going back from auctions, for our energy transition, I see we have only 5 minutes left, so I will go a bit faster. So going back to the energy transition, we saw that we need deployment policies, but we need more than deployment policies. We need policies that cut across all the technological avenues that we saw. So all the technology solutions, including renewables, energy efficiency, hydrogen, everything we saw. We need policies that cut across them. One of them is raising ambition in our commitments towards the energy transition. We see more and more countries committing to a net zero by 2050. We hope to see more by COP, or we hope to see stronger commitment, not only in those countries that are already rich countries and can deliver on their energy transition. We hope to see commitments from those countries who are supporting developing countries that for now cannot afford the energy transition by themselves. We need to see a phase out of fossil fuels. We need to see an elimination of distortion. So fossil fuel subsidies still exist in some areas. We need to see them phased out in order for renewables to compete fairly. But we have to make sure that as we phase out fossil fuels and their subsidies, that we pay attention to the lowest income population that cannot afford other alternatives. So those policies should come hand in hand with the protection of consumers. Innovation is super important everywhere in technology, in policy, in financing. And we need to raise awareness among consumers and citizens, not only on the need for the energy transition. By now, everybody understands the need for it, but there's a need for raising awareness on the technologies that are available, and mostly the ones that we can adopt ourselves in households. So the heat pump, the efficient appliances, and all of those to encourage their adoption. So what are the impacts of this energy transition on the economy? Globally, GDP would increase by 2.4% on average. So it's a positive increase globally, but we have to see the results by region and by country to make sure that everyone benefits from the energy transition. We see in terms of jobs that jobs will be created in general. In renewable energy in particular, the scenario leads to the 43 million jobs in 2050 in renewables. Last year, it was 11.5. IRENA tracks the jobs in renewables every year. So 43 million up from 11.5. They are mostly concentrated in solar PV, followed by bioenergy, wind, and hydropower. In terms of where the jobs are along the segments of the value chain, we see construction, installation, and manufacturing will see a lot of jobs in the next decade, so until 2030, after which we will see the bulk of jobs focused in operation and maintenance as more and more projects come online, and this is a long-term, like for 20 years on average that we will see, so we will see concentration there. In IRENA, we don't only talk about jobs and GDP, we talk about welfare. This is the first report that presents welfare in general. Because as we all know, a lot of things are not captured in a GDP. So we look at the economic index, the social index, the environmental index, the distributional index. So how is the distribution of the wealth and the profits and the benefits among the different segments of the population, and the access index. So it's very important to increase access to electricity. And we see that along all those dimensions, the energy transition fares much better than the planned energy scenario, or we are now currently now. So Renewable energy, as we said, has a lot of benefits. This is my last slide. If there's anything that you will remember this one. So we saw that a lot of benefits will take place at a global level, but we said that there are some countries or some communities where the picture is not very positive. Mainly those are the communities that currently rely on fossil fuel, on the fossil fuel economy for their jobs, for their livelihoods, etc. So we see that the benefits are positive globally, but there are misalignments and challenges. The challenges relate to, for example, labor, people who will lose their jobs. So this is the one we will focus on now. There's misalignments in terms of the time it takes to create jobs in renewables by the time people lose their jobs in fossil fuels. There are also geographic misalignments. So the areas where jobs will be created are not always the same areas where the jobs will be lost. So there is this misalignment. And there is also the introduction to make of the decent jobs agenda. So we don't only want to make sure the jobs are created, we also want to make sure that they are decent jobs, that the workers are benefit from a safe, a social protection safety net that we saw is very important during COVID. And we also need to make sure that there is diversity in terms of gender, in terms of marginalized populations, and so on and so forth. Other misalignments, for example, relate to structural dependencies. Those are the economies that are built on on fossil fuels, and to see how we can transition them in a very fair and inclusive way. So this is the last part of the presentation. What you see on the right side is the policy framework. We call it a comprehensive policy framework because it goes beyond renewable energy and beyond energy in general. So we saw the deployment policies. We spoke about the cutting across the enabling policies. Integrating policies are integrating renewable energy in the energy sector and the whole economy and the society and in the planet. So we need to make sure we integrate renewables in an environmentally safe way, using recycling or like what I spoke about, the sustainability of bioenergy, for example. The structural just and just transition policies will make sure that the people will transition in a just, inclusive way. We need to make sure everyone benefits. There's many different ways of doing that. One of them is the easiest way we just spoke about, is to retrain people to move from fossil fuels to renewables. But there's a whole bunch of policies that are needed to make sure that the economy or the socioeconomic benefits of this transition are maximized. A holistic global policy framework is needed. This is when all the countries come together to cooperate and to ensure that money flows from one area to another. As we said, Africa attracted a very small percentage of investments so far. We need to make sure that this increases. Climate policies are one of those, and they will be discussed in COP end of this month. But we want to see more of that. We have to see more of that happening in order to have an energy transition that leaves nobody behind. So thank you very much. This is the end of my presentation. I know I said too much, and now I am happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Diala, for the insightful and instructive sharing. And we do have quite a few questions. The very first question is, perhaps towards the beginning of your presentation, there's a slide that's showing, with the price, with the cost of different technologies dropping or rising, and in particular, the price of geothermal and hydropower were actually increasing. What were the reasons behind this increase?
Sure, but just a reminder, this slide is a slide on costs and not prices. And for us, the difference between cost and price is very important, because the price the cost is what it takes, what it costs the developer to produce every kilowatt hour. This is the levelized cost of electricity. This is what costs the producer to produce this electricity. When we talk about price in these slides, this slide, is what the price that he is willing to sell it for. And there's a difference between those two. So going back to the costs, why did these costs of some technologies go up? And it is a very, very good question. For geothermal, the cost depends on many things. One of them is the well. So how deep do you need to dig? So it goes from
where those projects are focused, and what is the cost of drilling and extracting this geothermal. So for example, you see in the first early days, we assumed that most of the projects that were developed in places where it was easy to extract the geothermal. And then as you go more and more with time, you go to sites that are less easy to extract, riskier. And you also see the cost, or among the cost of electricity here is the cost of financing. And the cost of financing increases when the risks increase. So geothermal is a very particular technology where addressing risks of exploration and not finding enough resources has to be mitigated, and is normally mitigated by the government. So geothermal is a bit of a risky technology when it comes to starting to explore, the exploration, and not finding much resources. We see the same for the fossil, I think it was the other question was for hydro. It's because one of the same reasons is because the sites are a bit less, with less potential, or accounting for drought perhaps. So perhaps some have higher risk accounted in their costs, because maybe they will find it that there will be more drought. But the most important reason for hydro is you see countries moving away from large hydro because it is sometimes not sustainable. It has negative impacts on societies and on the environment. So countries are moving more and more towards small hydro. And obviously, the larger the scale, the lower the cost, the distributed cost. So the smaller the scale, the higher the cost. So this can also be one reason.
Thank you. And our next question coming up is actually for myself. Curiosity question. You know, we discussed so much about auction, but what is really the current level of adoption across different regions of this pricing mechanism? And,
so continue.
And also, like, what, if not at a very high level, what is the traditional alternative pricing of renewable power?
So sorry, I'm moving my slides by mistake. Let me go back to the auction one. So as you can see here, we saw that more and more countries are adopting auctions, and we see that the auctions are being adopted globally in all the regions. What we are very happy to see is that in Africa also the auctions are increasing. Auctions used to be at the beginning very popular in Latin America, because in Latin America, the way that power markets are designed, they have been designed to go for competitive procurement throughout the whole time. So even with fossil fuels. So Latin America is very popular with auctions. They have a lot of innovation, and Brazil innovated a lot. And most recently, we saw Mexico, Chile, and now Colombia last year have very nice innovative auction designs and very low prices. In Europe now, it is as you know, the state aid guidelines. So for any developer who wants to receive any support from the government, they have to go for a competitive procurement. And this is because it is not fair to make the taxpayers pay more than what is needed. And this was happening in the feed-in tariff. So in the feed-in tariff, because when the government supports renewables, it's coming from taxpayers' money, or it is passed over to the consumers of electricity, like for example in Germany, who are recently paying a lot for their electricity as more renewable energy is deployed that is expensive. So the other mechanism that you're asking for is a fixed feed-in tariff or a fixed feed-in premium. So when you are in a fully liberalized market and you are selling your electricity to the market, to the liberalized market, the premium is what you get on top of the in-market price to make sure that it incentivizes renewable energy deployment. You get a premium on top of the electricity price. The feed-in tariff is what you get, a fixed tariff that is set by somebody in the government. Different methodologies of setting that tariff starts with, one of them can start with the LCOE that we saw, the cost. So they can calculate the levelized cost and give an additional premium. As we said, the price normally is higher than the cost. And this is what they consider as a feed-in tariff. It can be a bit high in some places because as the technology cost falls, as developers have more experience and as the sector matures, usually it drops. So the feed-in tariff doesn't capture this drop, and we pay extra to the developers. So the last thing I want to say that this doesn't mean that feed-in tariffs or feed-in premiums are not good and auctions are good. There's not one policy instrument that is good in any circumstance. Every country, every technology, every particular context would require a different policy mechanism that is convenient for that country. So for example, tomorrow, if you start with an auction straight away and there is no market, there is no competition, you will not benefit from the competition of an auction. The industry is still not ready for the auction, so it is not the adequate instrument in that country.
Thank you. And another question related to auction. Now that we know, in Europe there's a natural gas crisis, and what kind of impact would this crisis have on the auction of renewable energy price?
So it depends. If we are in countries where we are in an open, liberalized market, so which means that everyone can compete together, and as the price of electricity increases, it increases for everybody. So in countries in liberalized markets where the prices are not regulated, then as the price of electricity goes up, it means the renewable energy sellers are also benefiting from this increase in price, right? In markets where it is more regulated and where there is a cap that they cannot benefit more from, then they are just making the maximum than what is permitted. But in general, when it comes to the auction, it should be designed in a way that does not allow for windfall profits, and it should be designed in a way that matches the supply with demand. Of course, renewables have their tendency to be a bit to change. There's variability, but the variability from renewable energy technologies is more or less predictable, and it also comes with more and more other solutions to support this variability, like storage. So looking forward, we are confident that an energy system based on renewables would not see this type of volatility that we are seeing today in our current markets.
Thank you. And perhaps just one last question. Could we go back to the cost structure slide and
of course
explain a little bit what does those dots mean?
The size of the project. So each dot, so this, what you see here, this slide, it's based on real life projects. So those are projects that exist globally. So when you go on the vertical axis, it's the price, it's the US dollar price per kilowatt hour, the 2020 US dollar price. And the bigger the circle, the bigger the project. So this is why you see when it comes to hydro, you see that it was cheaper in 2010. And this is why I tell you one of the reasons is because in 2020, we have more small projects than small hydro than large hydro. It's because you see the circles going smaller. Thank you. And do you think we can have access to the slides? Of course. Of course. All of IRENA's products are online for free. Our website is a bit difficult to navigate, but I encourage everyone who is interested in renewables to make the effort and to try to find. All of our reports are free online and all of our presentations as well. And you will see a lot of interesting things there. And if there's something that you cannot find, please write to me. All right, thank you very much. And with that, I would like to conclude the session with Diana from IRENA. A very insightful and interesting talk. Thank you. And good luck to you. Congratulations, everyone. Good luck. Have a nice rest of the day. You too.